You're listening to a special presentation from Night of the Living Podcast, Zoned Out with Freddy and Joe. Hey there, Joe.
Hello, Freddy.
Oh, this is going to be a conversation starter in the biggest way possible this episode, I think. It's the deepest topic.
Yeah. Escape Clause, episode 6.
Aired on November 6, 1959. Guess how many cast members?
Ooh. I'm going to guess 13, 14 with Mr. Serling.
You are correct, sir.
Wow.
Weird.
That's got to be a thing.
I think
that's got to be a thing.
Yeah. Because you're fleshing it out by, you know, I feel like he's like, we got 11 people. Let's flesh it out with 2 kids in the street.
Yeah. Right. Or, you know, it's something. I wonder if there's, even if it's not Serling, even if it's like the DP, the director of photography or something, somebody's got a superstition. It's like, we got to do this many people.
I mean, they break it eventually, but there's quite a bit of them that are like this.
I wonder how much of that they you know, you start doing a show and you're like, oh, we should do this. Like, I mean, since we started doing the podcast, I started reading the outro at one point and I was like, oh, I kind of like that. I'm going to keep doing that. So
yeah, you build your organically build your traditions, right?
Right.
Well, we get a Broadway actor this time, big Broadway guy.
Yeah. Well, and like a ton of TV people who later go on to crazy commercial success. Literally commercial success. It's pretty funny. We end up getting a ton of people who later become recognizable faces, but in this you get kind of blink and you miss it.
I think Virginia Christie, who plays his wife, had for me one of the most interesting, just from a horror fan's perspective. She was in the original Body Snatchers, House of Horrors, and The Mummy's Curse, and some other stuff. But like, I always feel like it's cool when somebody from like the classic horror stuff pops up on the Twilight Zone. It's like the peanut butter and jelly.
It's like a pedigree. Yeah, totally. So a quick synopsis of this, and I guess rather than going, I usually go through it, but a synopsis is there's Walter Bedecker, played by David Wayne, and he's a hypochondriac. And as the intro says, he's gonna try and figure out a way to, you know, protect himself at all costs. I hate this dude. I can't stand the character.
He's incredibly selfish. One of the most selfish characters in the series. Yeah,
it was like, he's just terrible. He's like one of those cranky old guys who you imagine, but you're like, that you know nobody's like that.
He reminded me of the Claude Rains in The Invisible Man.
Oh, I haven't seen that old one. Yeah,
the old one's great, but he's just a nightmare kind of character. Who is it really like, whether you knew it or not, you're writing like basically a psychopath who doesn't understand other people are real kind of character.
Oh, right.
You know,
that makes a lot of sense. Actually, it was interesting. One of the factoids I read about the episode was, at the time this series or this episode aired, it was commonly believed a frequent cause of hypochondria was a desperate need to find something to occupy one's mind. This is from IMDb. And so a combination of boredom and lack of imagination about how to counter that boredom was the subject of several different TV series, having a one-off character doing this, like figuring a way out of hypochondria, which is just like, okay, like what a bizarre.
Was there do you think there was an epidemic of hypochondria in this era?
Well, so I was trying to look into that and think a little bit deeper around that. I think hypochondria probably became a more popular theme of things. Like it may became like I'm trying to think of a contemporary thing, you know, of like you'd have like a fad diet or something if this was like a fad illness. But I wonder if this is more endemic of the late 50s, early 60s kind of changes that were happening culturally. And so people are figuring out some of these things that we've called this thing for so long is actually, depression or
Yeah.
Munchausen what's it? Munchausen by
By
proxy.
proxy. Yeah. All
It was
those
weird.
things we didn't have names for yet.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And also I do think you're right. I think a lot of it is, this guy has a pretty severe kind of mental disorder of one kind or another,
Yeah.
but it's played for comedy.
Right. As a
Yeah,
psychopath
yeah.
for comedy.
Yeah, it's very much like, considering what this guy ultimately does,
Yeah.
that it's so light in the beginning.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because, or not funny, but like it gets really dark, and he's just an asshole through the whole thing.
Yeah. What is it? It's he's Walter, right? Walter Bedecker, and
Yeah.
and he gets visited by after doctors telling they don't, right? Was there a scene? I can't remember if there was any doctors in this episode. Was there?
Yeah. So right at the beginning, actually, this is kind of a cool thing. So the doctor right at the beginning comes in and checks on him, like the first scene, and the doctor is played by Raymond Bailey. So if y'all are familiar with the other shows from the 60s, 70s, whatever, Beverly Hillbillies, he was Dr. Mr. Drysdale, the bank owner from
I didn't
Beverly Hillbillies.
realize that. Oh my God.
So yeah, it was crazy. There's several other people from like who later go on to, like I said, commercial stuff. Virginia Christie, like you said, for Folgers Coffee. Dick Wilson, who was the claims adjuster at one point, Mr. Whipple from Charmin.
Wow.
It's like weird stuff, but we'll get into all that
I
later.
want to rewatch
it's
it now
goofy.
just to look for the faces.
Right? It's hard to catch them. It's like I said, you blink and you miss it, and you'd be like, oh, that's that person.
Like they're all familiar, but you don't know why.
Right. Well, and it was funny too, because I expected both a couple of different characters, but I'll get into it. So Walter Bedecker complaining all over the place. I actually had written down what a complaining POS. And he's badgering his I'm assuming his wife, Ethel.
Yeah.
He's just a dick,
Poor
man. And
Ethel.
she's long suffering. Yeah.
Does the doctor
wants to be happy.
offers her something, doesn't he? Realizing what she's suffering.
And he writes her a prescription for vitamins, which I'm like, okay, so vitamins had to be prescribed then? Or was this like, lithium or like was she getting something that was going to help her,
like that was
little,
the polite way of saying it, was calling them vitamins?
Yeah. What was the Simon and Garfunkel?
Mother's Little Helper? Or no, that.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Or they're the
put it in her pantry with her cupcakes.
Yes, that's the line I was thinking.
Yeah, but then
Mother's Little Helper was from
Rolling Stones
song. Yeah.
The Stones.
But that's all this sort of time. So I wonder if that was like, here's a little something. It was like, this will help you feel better.
Yeah.
It's like, ooh.
This will let you hate your husband a little bit less today.
If you're totally high and stoned while you're around him, you'll be better. So he's complaining his butt off, and she steps out of the room to talk to the doctor, and he's talking to himself, and he's like, I don't want to, I'm going to be dying within 20 minutes and all this stuff. He's very so assured that he's dying from everything. And another voice starts agreeing with him as he's talking and saying, well, why couldn't you live longer, and maybe tens of years, maybe 100 or 1,000 years?
Yeah.
And
I love
it does
this
one of
actor.
those comedy, one of those comedy takes where he's talking and he's like having the conversation with this other voice, and then he realizes, oh, there's somebody in the room with me. And he says right off the bat, says, my name right now is Codwaller. And of course, you're picking up the cues right away if you're familiar with the Twilight Zone. But on the first viewing, this might have been like okay, what's this about?
Yeah.
And much like, as we mentioned before with One for the Angels, here this guy appears in the apartment, and the guy looks at him, Walter Bedecker, is like, you're the devil. And he goes, at your service. I was like, ooh, nice play.
They should have done an all-star episode with like Death from from One for the Angels, and then Mr. Cadwallader, and then the other deaths from where Robert Redford was death later. Every Greek god.
I would love that. Yeah, all the ethereal godlike beings in one episode. That'd be great. So Cadwallader starts talking to him like, "Hey, yeah, you could live forever. Why not? Why couldn't you live forever? I mean, it's why wouldn't you want to? And I can offer you that in exchange for your soul." And at this point, I'm thinking, does Cadwallader, is the twist that Cadwallader doesn't have a soul to begin with, because he's just an asshole?
Oh, you mean Bedecker?
Oh, Bedecker. What did I say? Cadwallader. Cadwallader is the devil. But yeah, Bedecker. I'm like, does Bedecker even have a soul?
This is the only time I've ever heard the name Cadwallader. It's so weird.
I looked it up trying to find some reference for it, and it's like a family name, but I've never seen any reference to it as the devil. So I wonder if there's some backstory there with Serwin.
He didn't like somebody with that name.
Somebody made his list.
Yeah.
So they go back and forth, and this is where I love kind of that play of the Twilight Zone. Walter Bedicker's like so confident in himself that he's outsmarting the devil, and he's like, well, what about, I want to preserve my looks, and he's like, yeah, I'm not gonna change anything. I'll throw that in for free. And so they go back and forth for a little bit, and we're about halfway through the episode at this point, and Bedicker's like, all right, I'll do it. And so the devil makes a pen appear out of nowhere and pulls out a contract, and Bedecker barely looks at it and signs it. And then Cadwallader gets this stamp that's like smoking, and he stamps it with the devil thing. It was great. But it was funny because they did the sound effects for it. It was like, whoop, it appears out of nowhere.
And it's such a classic devil fork kind of stamp. It almost looks like a variation on the Greatest American Hero logo. Yes. If they turned that into like the devil's logo. It was
like the devil's trident.
Yeah, it looked cool.
Yeah.
And also the way the stamp stuck to the page was a nice touch. I don't know if that was planned or if it just happened. But
I don't think it was. It was funny because he kind of looks at him. Yeah, like dunk. And then what's funny, because this is a throwback for me. There was a episode of the old Mission Impossible. I don't know if you ever watched that show.
Yeah.
Yeah, with Robert Graves and other people. And there was an episode where they had to convince a group or a cult or something like that they were devils or like demons. And so there was all this like gear and stuff that they had. Like, for instance, they had contact lenses that could turn red on cue.
This is awesome. I don't remember this episode.
I gotta find it because it was super cool. Like, they did all kinds of little stuff. Like, I think there was something else. Maybe they could make smoke come out or something. But then the last part was they had metal plates in their shoes that would burn hoof marks in the carpet.
Brilliant. Have you watched Los Spookies at all?
No, what's that?
It's on Max. Los Spookies. It's a Spanish language show. It's very, very funny. It's about a team who do exactly what you just described, but they do that every episode, where they're hired to scare somebody, or to put on a supernatural event, for some other reason, whatever it could be. It's an excellent show.
Is it like a documentary, or
no? It's a comedy. It's a sitcom.
Oh, it's a comedy. Okay.
Yeah, and it just so happens their job is that they get hired to do events and stuff where they like put on a fake monster show because they're special effects artists.
Oh, that's cool. That's a great idea too, isn't it? Like,
it's great, man.
They do like Mythbusters, but for birthdays or something.
Yeah, and it's really absurdist humor too. It's not, it's not a procedural like you would expect. It's really about the jokes.
Just over the top. That's awesome.
Really, really fun.
So back to the contract. There's smoke coming off the contract, so it's all like classic there. And Cadwallader disappears when he stamps it. It sticks to it, like you said, and then he like pulls the stamp back, and the contract falls. And Walter, when he goes to grab it, stands up, turns around. And Cadwallader's gone. And he's like, this seems to all be in order. Just barely looks at the contract. I love that. And then his test to to verify that he is now immortal is he burns himself on the radiator.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know exactly what that proves, but like he puts his hands on them and they sizzle, but they don't actually burn. So
He has no pain. So
yeah.
I mean, that would be, when I thought about it, I was like, that's probably what I would do. That would burn myself would be the first thing. Cause like the brass balls come along when he starts drinking everything, every chemical in the house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and he's like, I don't know why he's immediately got to test it out with like, well, I should verify it. This is the thing about this episode to me also is this is the first one to me that felt really rushed. Like you had to because you had to cover so much stuff for him to get in the mode, sign the contract, verify that he's doing the stuff and all that.
And establish that relationship with him and his wife so that it makes sense what happens later and what kind of person he is.
Yes. So then right after he burns himself, he's like, oh, I must be, invulnerable and immortal. And he takes his like tray, his like food tray, opens the window and tosses it out the window. And I'm like, because he's trying to show I'm reinvented. Because then right after that, Ethel comes in. He's like, she's like, what's going on? He's like, behold, Ethel, behold the new Walter Pettiger. And then commercial.
Yeah. He didn't care about his wife one bit.
Not at all.
He already has the devil there making a bargain with him, and he's negotiating with the devil. And never once does her name come up.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just, ugh. And well, what the thing that made me laugh was when he opens up the window and tosses his tray out. He's supposed to be several stories up. You can see the rooftops of other buildings, but you can clearly hear the tray land on the floor on the other side of like the prop window and like the stuff scattering in there. I'm like, okay, well, I don't know. It just made me laugh.
Oh man. Again, if you this performance, watch The Invisible Man. Yeah, if you like this episode and that kind of character played to like loathsome, just kind of perfect.
Yeah. Interesting. I knew there was something about The Invisible Man where I was like, it was off-putting, but it sounds like is the character in The Invisible Man very much like a psychopath as well?
Yeah, he's terrible.
Okay.
He's a menace. Like he becomes because he has a power instead of, and I would say like movies like Chronicle kind of fit in with that where.
Oh yeah,
or Burn
God,
Bright.
I love that movie.
Or is it Burn Bright or Bright Burn?
Brightburn. Yeah.
Yeah, like this idea of power falling into the wrong hands and it being wasted on someone who has no character.
So speaking of power falling in the wrong hands, and this is like after the commercial break, the next scene, he's waiting for the subway and there's a bunch of people there. And he sees the subway come and just jumps onto the tracks. And everybody's like, oh, my God, The subway goes by. People are averting their eyes. You can hear little conversations in the background. And the train passes him. And he stands up and his suit's all ruined. But he climbs out. And the guy's like, are you okay? You okay? And right away, he's like, take your hands off of me and get your claims adjuster. And I was like, wow, this guy is terrible. He's just a jerk.
It's funny. Like we saw in the 80s, we always heard about, vexatious litigators and fraud lawsuits and stuff. But that's kind of like this guy is like Walmart's worst nightmare.
Yes, exactly. He's the person who would be going in there seeking exactly what's going to get him a payout.
Yeah, he's going to slip and fall. Something's going to fall on him from a top shelf.
That he precariously put there a week ago, like to walk under.
He was ahead of his time in that respect.
Exactly. Yeah. So he next scene, he's up in his apartment, and the subway company guy, who is the actor is Dick Wilson. The character's name is Jack. And it's Dick Wilson who played Mr. Whipple. And for those who are not familiar with Mr. Whipple, he played, it was a character played by that actor for 25 years.
Yeah, the Charmin bears ate him.
Yeah. Don't squeeze the Charmin. And I found out, actually funny, he had over like 500 performances as Mr. Whipple. I don't know if it was commercials and other stuff, but Procter and Gamble, who makes Charmin, gave him a lifetime supply of Charmin toilet tissue.
Right here in Cincinnati, Ohio, as a matter of fact.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
There you go.
We squeezed the Charmin every time we went to the store just because we couldn't afford it. We'd squeeze the Charmin. We'd buy the Scott.
Yes. Whatever. What is the single ply?
Yeah. You know?
I think our childhoods are fairly similar.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. But we'd squeeze the Charmin.
You're allowed to use 6 squares.
Yeah. My dad came around late in life to a softer toilet paper.
Yeah, that's good. I remember going to school and it was like thin paper towels.
Ooh,
but like the scratchy thin paper towels. It was bad.
They really didn't want you to have a bowel movement at school. They wanted to prevent it.
Oh man. Oh, he was also same actor Dick Wilson was on Bewitched for a few episodes too. Yeah. So
I loved that show.
He'd been on some of that.
We used to get that in the 80s with a double dose of I Dream of Jeannie.
Yes.
They'd pair them up usually, and broadcast them on in the afternoons.
I remember watching some of the other stations, like not your network stations, but like the other ones, and they'd be showing broadcasts of this is where I saw Beverly Hillbillies, Green Acres, all that sort of old shows from around this time or later in the 60s.
Kids will never know. So, they'll never know.
Yeah. I don't think they missed anything.
Yeah, they got good stuff now too.
So the subway leaves. Subway guy comes in and said, and Walter Bedeker's like, only $1,000, and he's like, Mr. Bedeker, based it on the fact that you only have, don't have a scratch on you. I said, I think it's very generous. And again, Bedeker like kicks him out, and as he does, another guy's coming in.
They know
from
each
the
other.
Bus company. Yeah, he's like, you too, huh, Jack? And
that was funny.
Yeah. So the bus company gives him $1,500, and then that guy gets kicked out. And Bedeker's just not happy. Ethel's there in the corner, and he's like, 14 accidents. 14. Wouldn't you think there'd be an element of thrill in 14 accidents? Well, there's not, and Ethel's like, I don't know, Walter. Like, count your blessings, what's wrong with you?
Walter lost his groove because he can't get excited anymore.
Yeah. Well, and like you said, I think he's that psychopath where he doesn't, it perfectly explains it now, but.
Isn't it weird that the one thing driving him before the deal was being afraid of everything?
Yes.
And now the thing that's really pushed him over the edge is being afraid of nothing at all. And you're just like, what the fuck? This whiplash, this thematic whiplash.
And he can't be happy, like he's an angry jerk throughout all of it. And yeah. So he's, at least when I was concerned about my health, there was an element of risk about it.
Yeah.
And then, he's complaining to Ethel some more, and she's like, what is going on? And finally he goes in the bathroom and he asks for ammonia. He finds some rubbing alcohol and makes this concoction and drinks it. And she's like, oh my God. She's freaking out, frazzled to her last nerve.
Do you have ammonia in your home, Joe?
I don't. I do probably have some cleaners with ammonia in them. I don't know, but
I know
that there's. Yeah, I think there's maybe that was a time when you could make mustard gas at your house.
Yeah, it's crazy with the level of danger involved with some of the chemicals that were just commonly around the house until recently. Yeah. And you realize that stuff is so dangerous.
And they had all those Mr. Yuck stickers so that kids wouldn't eat it,
Yeah.
It was a whole
didn't work
promotion.
on Bedeker.
Yeah, right. It was weak lemon. It's like lemonade, weak lemonade.
Yeah.
He's just complaining up a storm. So he says, I've had, what does he say? Hit by a subway, have had bus accidents, major fires, he says, poisoned myself. And he's like, now I think I'll go jump down the light well, 14 stories straight down. And she's like, what do you, stop. She's trying to treat him like a rational human being. And he goes, go drown in the tub, Ethel, leave me alone. I was like, no, he is awful.
He's a bastard. You know what light
This is
speaking
the
of
worst
light
character.
wells, you know, he mentions
Yeah.
that. I think a lot of people don't know what a light well is.
Yeah.
We don't have a lot of them here unless you get really in the old urban parts of town, like where
Yeah.
the German immigrants lived. But like, it's like if you're building a square, it's like a square open air column all the way down the middle because there are apartments on either side of a wall with windows on one side and you know none on the other because they were sharing
Right.
a wall, but it would get like really hot and they had shitty ventilation in these buildings. I don't know if they even build a lot of buildings this way anymore. I really don't know, but they use like the middle for like a courtyard.
Yeah, yeah, and I kept imagining the courtyard for that too, and I don't think they do that style anymore just because I think there's better they found now
Ventilation.
structures so they can do better, but I think at that time too, especially, you know, they were still working on the basic square shape for
Yeah.
architecture, so
I was fascinated with them when I was a kid. I still am, like, because you know, the first
yeah,
time I went into one, it feels like it makes it feel like it's from another era completely. Having a light well, you know, it feels
yeah,
yeah, and then it also is like super. It's cozy, but it's also like claustrophobic.
yes.
They're weird things. They're almost like a liminal space. You know, they're almost in that category for me.
It's a weird, feeling too of, like, if you've ever been in a building where they have a stairway around a central light well or something like that. There's a cathedral or something, I think, in Minneapolis or St. Paul, but it's the stairway that's right next to that, and the stairway railing is a little low because it's an older building. And I always think whenever I go in there, I'm just like, you know, I'm always going to lean over and fall
Yeah,
down the middle. But it messes with your vertigo or like your perception of depth, and so yeah. So if you ever see one, if you ever see a building like that, a lot of times they have old abandoned buildings or something like that. It's just it's interesting all that
really
kind of
is. It's like a whole
play it has.
different. Because I grew up in these little, tiny little, you know, block houses. You know, like single
Yeah, yeah,
floor slabs. You know, so anything to me, it was always like another world when you'd have something that's essentially, you know, like 6+ stories with this
totally.
magical closed off from the rest of the city, the space that's closed off. But it's also a place where you can splatter your guts everywhere if you want to do it, like Bedecker tries.
Right, right.
I don't recommend it.
And so he goes up to the roof and she's chasing after him and he keeps insulting her and she's like, please, Walter, come back, I'll make you potato pancakes, you used to love potato pancakes. Again, in true fashion, he goes, well, Ethel, you are a potato pancake.
He's such a monster. I love potato pancakes. I would
I've never had
gladly.
them.
Oh, you've never had one? Oh my God.
Uh-uh.
We have to get together if you ever come to Cincinnati and I'll take you to Izzy's and introduce you to
Ooh,
the best potato pancake in the world.
love it. I will come just for that.
Yeah,
We'll come for Horror Hound again sometime.
that would be great.
And then okay, so they're up there and she's talking to him and he's like, I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna do it, and she's like, Walter, stop, you know. And at some point they're talking and he kind of gestures and she falls backward and falls down 14 stories, and he doesn't even flinch. He just leans over and goes, oh, wonder what it felt like.
Yeah,
That's creepy.
he's super
This is
cold
like,
blooded.
it's like a black comedy. It's just ugh.
You know what's interesting
um
to wonder, theoretically,
yeah.
was he not that bad until he sold his soul? And because he sold his soul, he became bad?
Right. Maybe he went from afraid for his own life to being so unafraid without a soul that he didn't have any regard for anyone else's life. I mean,
Yeah.
he was a jerk before, but he didn't seem like he wanted to kill people.
He's
But
literally soulless.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I
because
wonder if that's intended. Yeah, that makes sense that he's trying to. They're trying to show that he's without a soul now.
you know, or it could have been just happenstance, but it seems like good writing to at least have
Right.
that inference. Because there's no like, if I remember correctly, I don't think there was like any future date when the devil was going to collect his soul. Right? It was that he
Right.
signed it over to him and he owned it.
Yeah. He could have it his life as long as he wanted. Actually, so this is a good point, is that they did put an escape clause in. where Walter could at any point say, yeah, I want you to take my life because I don't want to live anymore. And Walter's like, that's never going to happen. When I mean immortality, brother. And so Cadwallader's like, well, I'll put it in there just in case. You might want that. We might be some foreshadowing. And so he's leaning over the light well, Walter is, and he calmly goes back downstairs, picks up the phone, and calls the police. And he's like, "Police? Yes, please come over here right away. It's an emergency. Oh, it's no trouble. I just killed my wife." And it was just creepy. And again, I now that you mention it, that makes total sense that has no soul. So of course he's just diabolical and doesn't have the emotion part of it.
Yeah, and what's creepy is like, as silly and theatrical as the way he's acting is, if you watch a lot of true crime shows, there are people out there that act exactly like that after they killed somebody.
Yeah. Ooh.
Yeah.
It's just weird.
Very much so.
Well, and it's intended to be weird, right? It's a totally different human experience.
Yeah, that's true. You kind of like, you don't know how you're going to react, because it's like, you and I have not, I can speak for myself, Joe. I've never,
Right.
murdered anybody, but, I maybe I would be that way. Who knows? Accidentally kill somebody,
Right.
and then I'd just snap, and I would be all like smarmy and jokey about everything all the time.
Right. Disconnect from reality. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have also never killed anybody. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to vindicate myself. So the next scene, they clip to Cooper, who is his lawyer, who looks familiar, and he's been in a bunch of different shows, but I couldn't see anything that really stood out as something that he'd been in. But again, he and Cadwallader both have those big expressive faces, which are pretty great especially in these older episodes.
Oh yeah, that's Cadwallader, that Thomas Gomez. He was in Key Largo, the one who plays the devil. He was in Key Largo and Beneath the Planet of the Apes, are the two things that I'd seen him in before.
Gotcha. And so the lawyer, Mr. Cooper, who's played by Wendell Holmes, explains he's struggling to defend his client, and Walter's just like, it's nothing. He's just like, nah, I want to die. He intentionally wants to go, and the reason he called the police is he wants to go to the electric chair, and he wants to see what that feels like. He wants to feel something, which is just a bizarre, again, weird connection. But I think, to your point, there are people who are like, they just want to feel something. And that actually goes back to the beginning of it, when he burns his hands on the radiator. He doesn't feel anything. And so he's gone to this point where he's trying to feel anything, when before he felt everything as a hypochondriac, and now he feels nothing. So,
yeah. And I do think it all wraps up in this idea that he has no soul. He sold his soul.
Yeah.
He's a blank. And I love the way the trial turns out. It's a great twist.
So they jump to the trial and
they find him guilty, right? But they save him from the death penalty. His lawyer is like ironically really proud of himself. And he's like, but that's not what I wanted. He's going to be in prison for life, his natural life.
Yes.
Which has no end.
And and he's like, congratulations, we did it. And he's like, no. And the guard, they show him in the cell, and he's like, what's life to you? 40, 45 years? You can do that standing on your head. From the guard. And of course, he's reflecting and hearing Cadwallader's quote about the length of his life. What is it in the scheme of things? And then you hear Cadwallader's laughter echoing through the halls.
Yep, and he exercises that escape clause because he doesn't want to spend the rest of his natural 3,000-year life in the county jail.
Yeah.
I don't think he didn't think this through. He could have escaped. He had much more of a chance of escaping than any regular person. But this is where the themes of the episodes are more important than the story of the episode or the plot. Plot really isn't. Twilight Zone is not about plot. It's about themes, and it's about like um, lessons and morals, really, for the most part.
Yeah. Yeah. What's the parable of the episode? I mean, it's really trying to get to that short story-esque, what are you learning from this?
Right. Yeah.
And so after he's reflecting, no, he's feeling frustrated and sad. And here we see a cool special effect with Cadwallader appearing translucently in the cell with him.
Like a force
You
ghost.
can actually, yeah, and you can see him there. And he goes, Mr. Bedecker, about that escape clause, care to use it now? And Walter nods in kind of a morose, remorseful way, which is the only piece that I feel like didn't fit with like the whole psychopath, like he's lost everything, but it's like kind of resigned also. And then he says, that's a wise man. Odd thing, you look like a man having a heart attack. Just like a man having a heart attack. And Walter's eyes kind of bug out and he falls over and dies.
Yeah. If they did this now, his head would have just popped, sprayed blood all over the walls of the cell. Could you imagine?
That would probably have been a little graphic for the 60s, the 50s.
Yeah. Like everybody would be like, remember that one time the Twilight Zone went too far? They had this beautiful story about the loss of your soul, and it ended with a guy's head popping.
Yeah. Well, he's got to justify that special effects budget.
Yeah. This shows the great restraint of Rod Serling.
Right. So the guard comes in and says, looking over the guy, he says, oh, poor devil. And it was like, I think that was intended to be like a quippy line, but I don't know, didn't quite land,
Yeah.
I think. But
showed how compassionate that guard was.
yeah.
He still saw him as a human being.
Yeah.
If he only knew.
And then, of course, the outro, there's a saying, every man is put on earth condemned to die, time and method of execution unknown. Perhaps this is as it should be. Case in point, Walter Bedecker, lately deceased, a little man with such a yen to live, beaten by the devil, by his own boredom, and by the scheme of things in this, the Twilight Zone.
Ooh.
So
it was a good one.
I thought, I upon more reflection of your insights, I think, maybe it did have a lot more to do with intention that he was such an evil guy afterwards.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not 100% sure. I could go back and watch this, and maybe there's a little dialogue about when the soul transfer happens that I missed, but I'm pretty sure they didn't cover that part.
Sure.
But if they did, then it could totally blow my theory out of the water. So
now there was one more piece of this that I thought was interesting, and it's not really per se connected to the episode, but it struck me. So in the one that I watched, at the very end, sometimes they show like and now for Rod Serling will present after our alternate sponsor. He introduces the next episode, which is The Lonely, which is one of my favorites. And I can't wait for that one. But at the very, very end of it, right before the kind of showing of the production company, they show this ad and it goes, strength and beauty are found in the Lord's sanctuary. And it's showing like a service in a synagogue. Find the strength for your life. Worship together this week. And I was like,
wait, where did you stream this?
I have all the episodes. I bought them all on, first I bought them all on DVD, and then I rebought them all on Blu-ray. So I
don't think that bit was in what I saw. I think it,
yeah,
because I watched it streaming on Paramount Plus.
Okay. It was weird. It was weird. Very, like right at the very end. And after that, a logo came up and it said Advertising Council / Public Service. So it looks like it's a public service message about worshiping together.
Because it's about the devil. This episode was about selling your soul.
Right. And I wonder if this was a reaction in advance from Serling that's like, hey, religion. Maybe give it a shot. I don't know. It was interesting, and I wonder what the story is behind that. So I'd love to know more about why that appeared. But it just really threw me because I've never seen anything like that on TV.
Well, you know, it's
Like
weird
they would
too.
promote that.
I've read a lot about Rod Serling over the years, but I don't remember ever coming across anything about his religious life.
Right.
Now I want to know.
Yeah. I'm
Interesting.
curious.
Yeah.
Kind of threw me.
So, yep. What was the name of this episode again? Yeah, Escape Clause. That's right.
The Escape Clause.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and as we mentioned, Ethel was famous for being Mrs. Olson from the Folgers coffee commercials starting in the 60s. Excuse me. She went for 21 years. She was the woman who would help other people make coffee. And I say other people, but it was at the time, knowing the sexist 60s and 70s, it was always women who were frustrated by not being able to make good coffee. And she would appear and
God damn it! This tastes like piss.
shattering the carafe or something like that.
And then she comes out
terrible. And then she's like, it's mountain grown Folgers.
She's like,
and,
first, calm the fuck down. It's just coffee.
Here, I have some vitamins for you.
Here, take these. Wash them down with anything, darling.
Next, get the kids, get in the car, and leave. Because if he's complaining about your coffee, that's the last thing you need to worry about.
That's right. It's time to go.
Yeah. But yeah. Oh, and David Wayne, the Walter Bedecker. The other thing I saw that he was in was the Andromeda Strain, which I keep hearing about, and I haven't watched. But isn't that Michael Crichton?
It's a great book, and it's a very quick read. It's like concentrated Michael Crichton. It's probably the lowest page count of anything I've read by him, and it's just a very effective plague story. And the movie is very good too. I really like the movie a lot, but the book is really, really good.
What threw me about that is I remember the first Michael Crichton book I encountered was Jurassic Park, and so when I read that, I was like, wait a minute, he's been around forever. Then, like, Andromeda Strain is an old story, isn't it?
Yeah, 70s, I want to say.
Okay. Yeah. So not like super old, but like
I can't remember
Crichton
when
must have
the
been
book came out.
fairly old.
I'm going to look it up, though, because I'm curious.
Yeah, I remember it being a really old movie. So the book was obviously before that and had to build up, some kind of following. But anyway, just kind of threw me.
The movie was 71. The novel... Ooh, you think they would put a date like right there at the very beginning?
Right.
69.
Okay. So maybe it was beginning of Crichton's popularity as a mainstream writer or something. But
yeah,
anyway,
it was the Andromeda Strain feels a lot like a Stephen King book. If you like Stephen King, yeah, it's. I have never read Jurassic Park. I think I'm one of the few people on the planet who's never read that book.
I feel like it was very similar to the movie. I think they had a couple of differences, but I can't recall. It was years and years ago, and I read it. I was working at part-time at a UPS warehouse at the time, and whenever there weren't packages coming down the line, I was reading this book, and it was weird.
There were so many
very weird time.
Comforting about Michael Crichton's formula of flying in experts. Because it happens, I think, in every one of his books I've read, somebody has to get on a helicopter because they know something that no one else knows. It's kind of fun.
Bring in the genius.
Yeah. I hear he was a little bit of a anti something or other. I don't know. He got into some controversial political stuff near the end of his life.
Oh,
I don't know if it had to do with environmentalism. It was something. I don't know. I'm not going to, I'm going to encourage people to Google it if you care.
Right.
I really don't. But yeah, Crichton is kind of, when you think of it, he is someone who was so influenced by the Twilight Zone. It's really obvious. And that he's kind of maybe the generation that came out of these writers, until he found his formula and wrote the same kind of story over and over again. But like, the idea of science run amok.
Yeah. I think a lot of that we see later too. And again, obviously, as we mentioned before in previous episodes, how Black Mirror is influenced by all this and of more of the technology focus. But I think that's where we're seeing it more because that's where we are as a society. We're so focused on the technology that, you know, we want to hear the stories about it run amok. We want to hear the stories about it changing everyone's life and being wonderful. You know, that's our
kind of ties in with next week's episode, The Lonely.
Yeah,
it's the first time I think they go hard, kind of hard sci-fi.
Yeah, I don't want to reveal too much because I feel like it's a really great episode. So I'm sure people probably seen it, but look excited about it. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks, Joe.
Thank you, Freddie.
All right. We'll be back next time with The Lonely.